Hello, everybody. This is Mike Schwab from Access. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait for approximately 2 more minutes for some additional attendees to join us. Please stand by, and we'll be getting started very shortly. Hello, this is Mike Schwab from Access. We're going to wait about another minute before we get started. I think for most of the attendees, you are automatically muted. But if you've joined the call and you're not muted, I would advise that you please mute. We do hear a little bit of background noise at this time. We'll get started here very soon. All right, let's get started. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. Our topic for today is Developing a RIM Policy, Lessons You Were Never Taught. Today's webinar is co-presented by Access and Kaizen InfoSource. Again, welcome. I want to let everyone know that today's webinar is going to be part of an online educational series jointly hosted by Access and Kaizen InfoSource. I think for many of you, you've been invited to the first in a series of webinars. The topics are designed to be timely, relevant, and in response to our clients' questions. And the types of questions and issues that folks in the field in the domain of records and information management are asking and struggling with. The format for the webinar series is intended to be short in duration and very focused. We want to make sure that we deliver the right information, pose the right types of questions that we can help answer. And I want to let everybody know that the content, the recording for the webinar, will be available the next day on the Access and Kaizen websites. So if you want to go back and have a listen or share the recording and content with a colleague, you'll have the ability to do so by accessing it via the websites. I'd like to now introduce today's presenter, which is Helen Streck from Kaizen. Helen is Kaizen's president and CEO. And I'm going to turn it over to Helen and let her tell you a little bit about Kaizen and more about today's program. Helen?
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that introduction, and welcome everyone. We're very excited at Kaizen to partner with Access for these online educational sessions. We are a consulting company, and we do records and information and records and IT consulting services. And each of the consultants from Kaizen has more than 20 years of experience. So we have quite a foundation of knowledge in our consultants. And what we're doing with this online series is we're going to give you the benefit of that experience. We're going to give you our knowledge that we've learned being both practitioners in the field and implementing new programs. And to that point, there's a lot of things that you can learn in the books, or you can talk to legal teams about how to do something, but we're going to talk about the practical things in these topics. So today, on how to develop a policy, we're going to talk to you about policy points, but we're going to tell you things you never learned in the books, or we're going to tell you about the things that you never experienced through the educational. You experienced them by doing them. And we're going to make this a very useful topic, and we're going to get right to the point. Our goal in these educational online sessions is to help guide you to avoid making the mistakes that we've actually had to live through and overcome, and to help you achieve success faster. We have asked that you save your questions to the end of the slides and you type them in. That will enable us to answer your questions more efficiently, and since there's a number of folks on the webinar, it's easier for us to monitor and manage if you will allow us the courtesy of doing that at the end and typing in your questions. So with that brief introduction, let me start first by talking about the policy itself. So my first question is always why? Why do you need a policy? Well, in fact, there's a lot of reasons why you need a records and information management policy. First of all, it's good self-governance. It's managing an asset for your organization. But in addition to that, it helps reduce risk, because it tells your regulatory bodies or your government agencies, we have a way of managing information, and we practice that. And the second thing that a policy does is it actually informs the employees of what's expected. And most people don't look at a policy with that kind of an eye. So you have to look at, there's really good reasons for having a records and information management policy. But most important, if you look at information as an asset, just like you do human resource people and your personnel, then you have to manage that in an ongoing fashion. For a policy, we have components, and we recommend components that belong in a records and information management policy. The sections of your policy should address the creation of information. So how is it created? What's the appropriateness? Do you date it? Is it signed? So you have a section on creating information. The other section is you want to have a section on who owns that information. In the world today, we work on our own devices. There's a lot of BYOD, bring your own device to work, but it is still the company's information. So you have to have a policy statement that addresses who owns the information and who's responsible for it. In addition, you want to talk about those traditional things called storage and management. Where is it stored? How's it stored? What's the appropriate mechanism for storing information? And when you need it, what is the process that you need to follow? And of course, some of the foundational components is retention in the policy, and when retention must be suspended, you have to have a section on legal holds. And then finally, how are you going to protect that information? We've often seen policies with more components, and we'll get into that because those are some of the lessons that we've learned on the side. So we want to tell you that this is what a policy for records and information management has in it. Those are the elements that must be addressed in that policy. And so those will make it stronger and simpler. But the lessons you were never taught was that oftentimes policies are written and people or organizations try to write the procedure inside the policy. What happens when that occurs is it confuses employees. It makes the policy very complicated, and then you know, what happens when there's exceptions? Because in a policy statement, if it's too detailed, too rigid, and not at the right level, then people will work around those rules. So the policy is a set of rules. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the rules we will follow. But the policy should never include the procedure on how you implement, because that ability to implement and comply with that rule may be a little different from department to department, or subsidiary or division to division. What you don't want to do is impede someone from complying because you've made the rule and the procedure the same way, and the procedure may not be applicable across departments. And we've seen that happen. And when we see that happen, we are very sure that there's somewhere along the line people who are not following, and you're automatically out of compliance. So you don't want to write the rules so that people will automatically be out of compliance. That's real important. The other thing we've seen in policies and that you're never taught is they're more than just retention. If you noticed in that earlier slide, we told you all of the pieces and elements that belong in a policy. Retention is just a single component. And when you have a retention policy, you don't have a records and information management policy, and retention is just a part of how you're going to manage and take care of that asset for the organization. So we've seen policies that don't quite cover everything, or they're only addressing retention, and all of a sudden there's great big gaps and things are falling through the holes. So you won't have compliance, or retention only addresses a piece. The other thing is we've also seen where the policies only cover paper. And you have to make sure that your policy is neutral to the media in which the information is stored. Because the government doesn't look at paper, doesn't look at electronic, they're looking at the information. So when it says you have to retain something for 5 years, they're allowing you to store it in the media that they think is best, that you think is best. Another lesson we've learned is we've seen policies that are trying to fix a problem. And by that, they were written because litigation started or an audit found something. Instead of neutralizing that language in the policy and making it work for the entire organization. So don't try to fix a problem. Write the rules that are really neutral for the entire organization. And the policy should be written in collaboration with records management, legal, and IT. And when I say that, because as a former practitioner, my job in records and information management was to make sure that that policy was digestible or understandable by all employees at every level. We recommend that you write anywhere between an 8th and 10th grade level. Sentences are very simple. They're straightforward. There's no guessing what I'm supposed to do. And that's going to make your policy much stronger, and it's going to be easier to implement. If they're very legalese or very detailed, it's really hard to make them work really well. So those are some lessons we've learned on the side, and that you were probably never taught. Some other lessons that you were probably never taught is that if you have a policy, you really need to have what we call subordinate documents, procedures, guidelines, standards, forms, templates, to enable compliance. A policy cannot stand alone and be compliant, because employees need the roadmap to make it work. If you remember that the policy is a rule document, then you're going to need that subordinate document to make it work and to be compliant. So don't think that just because we have a policy, oh, we're going to be compliant, that's all we need. We really do tell our clients when we work with them is The policy is really not that hard to write, and I don't think it is, but making it work for you is a lot of work. So we want to make sure you understand that just having a policy isn't going to get you where you need to go. You've got to have the other pieces. Be sure when you're writing one that you address legal or audit holds so that when litigation comes up, the rule is already written and employees can be trained on how to respond. So when the legal hold is issued or an audit hold is issued, the retention requirements are stopped. You don't keep calculating them, and nothing should be destroyed that is relevant to that hold. Really important. One of the largest gaps we've seen in policy writing is that organizations forget that information has to be managed by employees when they leave for employees who have left the organization. So as an employee leaves, what happens to that information? Many times it becomes abandoned or what we call orphaned, and it sits on servers, it sits in cabinets, or it can be left at off-site storage facilities without being managed. So don't forget to address how you're going to take care of the information when someone leaves the organization. It's a very key issue and a very high risk issue in the event that litigation does start. Because when litigation starts, they want everything that's relevant. And if you haven't managed that information and told employees what the rules are about what happens, then it's still going to be subject to a legal hold. And that becomes very costly. We also recommend to not to put your policy and your retention schedule as a single document. Policies sit at the very highest level of your governance structure, and your retention schedule is a component of that, but it should be a document that you can modify and change as is reasonably necessary, and you don't have to go through as the same approval process that most policies require within an organization. Most policies are reviewed by legal, they're reviewed by the highest level, and may even be approved by board of directors. If that's the case, then a retention schedule, every time you need to make an adjustment, whether it's adding a category or adding an example, you don't want to have to go through that extreme level of review. It makes it very hard and very tedious. So records management can be slimmed down, and it can be more efficient if you don't put all the documentations together. Make sure your policy stands alone and your retention schedule stands alone, but there is a relationship to them so that employees understand. And in order for employees to understand, you've got to make that policy visible. Writing one and putting it in a cabinet, writing one and putting it on a shared drive that everyone doesn't have access to doesn't make it visible. One of the key things we found in our experience is that if you are investigated, if you are in litigation, one of the questions you're going to be asked is, how do employees know what the policy says? Do you send it to them? Do you provide it so they can find it if they have questions? Is it transparent to the employees that information is actually governed and protected like all the other assets? Those are things that you're probably not taught, but it's really, really important. We wanted to let you know in this brief webinar series, in this online series, that there are things that will help you make things easier. It will help you more compliant. We hope that these few lessons that you were never taught actually make it easier for you to be successful in designing, implementing, and educating your employees about your records and information management policy. If you need more help, please feel free to contact us. And we want you to know that the next session, we're going to talk about bringing the right team to the RIM table. and we're going to tell you lessons we've learned on the side, and that is scheduled for May 23rd. We'll have everything available on the Access website as well as the Kaizen InfoSource, so we hope you'll visit our websites and find out more about the online sessions that are going to be coming up to tell you these brief snippets of information that hopefully will make you more successful in your role in managing records and information. At this time, do you have any questions that we could answer? You have our website information, you have Access's website information, and you have my email address here. Sometimes questions pop up that you didn't think of while we were talking, and we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask those questions. We appreciate that you've spent your time with us for the last 20 minutes, and we've made a commitment to you to make these brief. We've made a commitment to you to make these to the point, and yet we want to be available to you to answer any questions you might have so that you can get the help that you need. We're here to help you and to make you more successful. So I'll wait one more minute to see if there's any questions. Well, I want to thank you for your time. It was my pleasure to be with you this morning. I hope that this was of value to you. We are going to be looking for your feedback, and hopefully in the course of these online sessions, you'll be able to give us some feedback that makes it better for you. And we're always looking for you to tell us, what do you need more information about? So on behalf of Access and Kaizen InfoSource, I'd like to thank you for your time and for attending this first online session.